You know, Dubuque has a reputation among mayors and is a great example of how cities and towns are leading the way when sometimes Washington can't get its act together. I just want you to know that the environmental work and the climate action that's been done in this city is something that's been noticed around the country, and you ought to be proud of it. I come from a Midwestern city, too. Which way's east? I'm about 5 hours that way on I-80. A river city. And a city that taught me that what is most important about politics is not the political game. It's not who looks good on TV. It's not who sounded good in a committee meeting or got off the best zinger in a debate. It's about the fact that political decisions affect our everyday lives. They affect our communities. They affect our families. They affect our paychecks, our marriages. This is why we have government and politics, is to try to make those things better. And yet, right now, we send politicians to Washington hoping they're going to fight for us. And when they get there, it feels like they're more interested in the part about fighting than they are in the part about us. And that's what's got to change. I grew up in a city that wore the imprint of decisions that left Middle America behind. I didn't even know it was unusual as a kid growing up, looking out the window of my dad's Chevy on the way to school. I didn't know it was unusual to pass by empty factories and broken down houses until I went away to go to school. But I learned firsthand what happens to a city when we don't have the right kind of leadership nationally. I saw in my own life the good and bad that politics can do. There are people in my family who were saved by Obamacare. And we're thankful for what that made possible. But also people I care about who were lost to the opioid crisis. The course of my own life was changed by the orders that sent me to a foreign war. Now, on the other hand, best thing in my life, my marriage, exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. And Iowa had a little bit to do with bringing us marriage equality, and we're thankful for that too. So I think we live in a moment where we've got to reorient our government and our politics around what actually matters most, and that's our everyday lives, which is hard to do because of the unbelievable noise coming out of Washington. But what I'm making the case for is that the crisis that's upon us right now is even bigger than the crisis that this president represents. Now, don't get me wrong. This president amounts to a national emergency. We know that. We can't go on like this. We can't have 4 more years of this. We can't have a president admit on national television to trying to involve a foreign government in impacting the American election and accept that as normal. But I also don't think it's normal for somebody like that to have been able to take over one of our major American political parties in the first place. To put it another way, if everything was going along just fine in this country, it would not have been possible for somebody like him to get within cheating distance of the Oval Office to begin with. So let's get to the root of the issue. Let's figure out the cause that this current moment is a symptom of. And when we do, I think we'll realize that this crisis has been brewing for a long time. We've got an economy where the Dow Jones can go up and life expectancy is going down at the same time. That shouldn't even be possible. We've watched as climate change went from a theory to an observation, from a prediction to a reality, and now to an emergency, and we're still having the very same debates over not just how, but whether to do anything about it. We see the crisis of gun violence in our schools, and yet the debate has not changed very much since the days when I was in high school. When I came home one day from junior year in high school and turned on the TV and saw the Columbine shooting. We have produced a second school shooting generation. Shame on us if we allow there to be a third. So what we're going to have to do is come up with ideas that are going to be bold enough to meet the moment, not just repeat ourselves or recycle the same arguments that we've had, but actually get something done. And while we're at it, we got to unify an American people that is dangerously, frighteningly divided and polarized and discouraged. Now, the argument that I'm here to make is that it is not only possible, it is necessary to do both. In other words, don't listen to those who say that we can't be bold at a time like this. Because the reality is, the other side is going to say the same thing about us no matter what we do. We have got to come up with solutions that are bold enough to meet the moment. But also, don't listen to anybody who says that we've got, in the name of being bold, to turn off half the American people and tell them they don't belong and bring in ideas that say my way or the highway that shut out our fellow Americans before we even get to Election Day. Because a good idea, a bold idea, should also have the capacity to unify the American people, especially with a good president. And that's the kind of president that I seek to be. Now, of course, before anyone gets to be president, first you got to actually win the election. And I know that a lot of voters who come to events like this and see people like me are really asking the question, who's going to be able to win? As one person very bluntly put it to me in New Hampshire, he said, you seem great, but I would vote for my neighbor's dog if I thought that's who could beat Donald Trump. And I think a lot of folks feel that. So let me just very briefly talk about why I'm the best candidate to defeat this president. First of all, the usual attacks aren't going to work on me. They're going to rant about socialism no matter what, but I cut my teeth in the private sector, and part of how South Bend came back was I knew how to engage the private sector and make sure that we could be pro-worker and pro-growth at the same time. So we're going to put that argument to bed. They'll try to talk about Washington, but the beauty is I don't work in Washington. I'm not from Washington. I'm from right here in the Midwest. A mayor solving problems, getting things done. And insisting that we'd be well served if we get Washington to look a little more like our best run cities instead of the other way around. And then they'll do that other thing they do sometimes where this president sometimes literally will hug the flag and throw a military parade for himself. And let me tell you, if they want to debate national security, I can't wait, because I've seen worse incoming than a misspelled tweet. But the other thing we got to do in order to win is we got to deserve to win. And that means no matter how much crazy nonsense is coming out of this White House, as soon as we're done calling it out, as soon as we put it in its place, we've got to get back to talking about what's impacting our lives. Because the more we talk about him, the less we're talking about you. And we've got to deny him the power to change the subject. So let's talk about what it actually means in our lives when we have a president who governs according to our values, who looks for those bold ideas that can also bring us together. What does that actually mean in practice? Well, let's think about it in terms of the values that ought to hold us together as Americans, like love of our country. If we really love our country, that means we love the freedoms that this country is built on. That means that patriotism implies an obligation to speak up about our values, and when somebody does, even when they criticize, or especially when they criticize the president, they deserve better than to be told to go back to where they came from. I'm talking about a different kind of love of country, one that actually keeps us safe from the threats that are mounting all around us, the 21st century threats like cybersecurity and election security that aren't going to respond to a 17th century solution like putting up a wall. I'm talking about keeping Americans safe from gun violence, which means summoning the courage not to allow the Second Amendment to be twisted into an excuse to do nothing and allow our schools and malls and churches to become battlefields. I'm talking about protecting America from white nationalist violence before it takes one more life in this country. And yes, I'm talking about treating climate change like the security issue that it is and showing global leadership in how to do it. That's part of what it means to love this country and care about her future and take care of each other. Governing in accordance with American values like freedom means recognizing that there's more to freedom than cutting a regulation somewhere. Freedom means more than Amazon's freedom to not have to pay any federal taxes on multi-billion-dollar profits. Real freedom means making sure we can live well, the freedom to live a life of our choosing.